Welcome to the Strategy Sync YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries. I am genuinely excited for this deep dive because we are tackling one of the most seminal and maybe one of the most controversial books in modern startup philosophy.
It's a big one.
A really big one. We're talking about Peter Thiel's 0 to 1, Notes on Startups, or How to Build the Future. And if you've ever been curious about the foundational mindset of Silicon Valley's biggest winners, this book is basically the blueprint.
It really is. It's the source code for a certain way of thinking.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to extract the absolute most important nuggets, the key insights from this book, to help you think like a true world-changing founder and not just, an incremental manager.
And the book's power, it really lies in its rejection of what you might call conventional business wisdom. Thiel and his co-author, Blake Masters, they explicitly argue against this idea that success just means dominating an existing market.
Right. It's not just about winning the current game.
Not at all. To really get their philosophy, you have to grasp this core thesis, which is the distinction between two fundamentally different types of progress. It's the difference between moving from 1 to N versus moving from 0 to 1.
That distinction, it sounds almost mathematical, but it really does underpin everything else in the book. So let's define it. How do we think about horizontal progress versus vertical progress in, simple terms?
Think of it as invention versus replication. That's the easiest way.
Okay.
So horizontal or extensive progress, the 1 to N, that's just straightforward copying. It's taking something that already works and doing more of it, or making it cheaper.
Like franchising a restaurant.
Exactly. Or, the book's example is if you had one old typewriter back in 1900 and then you just built 100 identical ones. That's 1 to N. It's familiar, it's comfortable, and it's pretty predictable.
And at the big macro level, the word for that is?
Globalization. That's the single word the book uses for this kind of progress. It's about taking things that work in the developed world, like America's infrastructure from the 20th century, and just replicating them everywhere else.
Right. So globalization is about distribution. It's about spreading an existing blueprint. But that inherently limits how much progress you can actually make because you're always bound by that original design.
Precisely. The truly valuable, the disruptive progress is vertical or intensive progress. That's the 0 to 1.
The act of creation.
It's the act of creation itself. It's doing new things that result in something completely novel, something that feels, as they say, fresh and strange because it just hasn't existed before.
So not building 100 more typewriters?
But inventing the word processor, that's the jump. That singular leap from nothing to something is what they call technology. And this is critical. They expand the definition of technology beyond just, computer science.
Right. It's not just about code.
No. It's any new and significantly better way of doing things. It's that moment of breakthrough, what the author calls a miracle, that lets us dramatically improve our output with the same or even fewer resources.
And the book makes a very strong, I'd say urgent argument about why this matters right now. It suggests that choosing 0 to 1 over 1 to N isn't just a philosophical choice for founders. It's an economic necessity for society.
Well, absolutely. The argument is that without a renewed commitment to that 0 to 1 creation, and not just in software, but across energy, materials, transport, that American companies really risk stagnation and long-term failure.
And globally.
Well, at the macro level, relying only on globalization, that 1 to N model, is just fundamentally unsustainable. If, for instance, India's hundreds of millions of households were to suddenly live exactly like Americans do today, but using only our existing tools, the result would be environmentally and economically catastrophic.
You can't just copy and paste the past.
I can't. We have to invent a new way forward.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting because the author uses this core premise, this need for original thinking, to frame what might be the most powerful tool for critical thought in the entire book.
The contrarian question.
The contrarian question, yeah. This is the question they famously use in every job interview, every lecture.
And it sounds so simple. The question is just, what important truth do very few people agree with you on?
But answering it well it's just brutally difficult. It's meant to test whether a person can actually think for themselves.
It really is. I think most people can come up with an unpopular opinion pretty quickly. Take one side in some familiar political or cultural debate.
Sure, like, I think taxes are too high or something like that.
Exactly. But Thiel says those are almost always bad answers.
Why is that?
Because a good answer has to satisfy two really tough criteria. First, it has to identify a non-obvious truth. a secret. And second, it requires the intellectual courage to state a belief that's genuinely unpopular, not just one side of a common argument.
So if you say, most people think student debt is fine, but I think it's a crisis, you're still kind of on a well-trod path. You're not really articulating a secret.
You're not. The book says a truly valuable answer takes the form of, most people believe in X, but the truth is the opposite of X. It requires you to think from first principles, to just throw out the formulas and the consensus.
And the author's own contrarian answer ties directly back to everything we've just discussed, that whole dichotomy of 0 to 1 versus 1 to n.
It's the perfect link. The author's own answer is this. Most people today think the future will be defined by globalization, 1 to n.
By spreading existing technology.
Right. But the truth, he says, is that technology 0 to 1 matters more. In fact, it's essential for survival. The consensus is that incremental distribution is the safest path, but the truth is, without major technological breakthroughs, we can't even maintain our current standards of living, let alone improve them sustainably worldwide.
So to understand why this focus on singular creation, this 0 to 1 idea, has become such a radical and necessary position, we really have to revisit some history.
We do.
Specifically, the lessons that were learned from the late 90s dot-com bubble between, say, 1998 and 2002. This period was just. It was an irrational mania, and the collapse that followed led to this set of overly cautious dogmas that, according to the book, still distort how we think about business today.
That era really crystallized the dangers of groupthink. When a conventional belief collapses, we call it a bubble, and the dot-com mania was certainly the biggest one since 1929. The author notes that those conventional beliefs, they only look completely arbitrary in retrospect.
I remember it. During the most intense 18 months, from September 98 to March 2000, profit was secondary. It was all about metrics like page views and user acquisition.
Eyeballs.
Eyeballs, exactly. Companies were valued on potential, not performance.
But we have to remember the economic backdrop, though. The exuberance, it wasn't entirely baseless. The 1990s recovery was actually pretty sluggish, especially outside of a few tech sectors. There was this sense that the old economy, heavy industry, slow banking, was failing.
So people were looking for something new.
They were desperate for it. And then you had these major global crises in 98, like the Asian financial crisis and the LTCM hedge fund bailout. And for many people, that just confirmed that the traditional systems were brittle. So the new economy of the internet, it became the primary, almost messianic hope for the future.
And the PayPal origin story, it just perfectly encapsulates the rapid, sometimes manic, but ultimately necessary action of that chaotic era.
It absolutely does. Their initial, deeply ambitious 0 to 1 mission was to create a new internet currency to completely replace the US dollar. Just total contrarian thinking.
But they had to survive first.
Exactly. Their first attempt at a product, letting users beam money from one Palm Pilot to another, it failed spectacularly. It was actually voted one of the 10 worst business ideas of 1999.
Wow, why so bad?
The market was just too small and fragmented. Nobody really needed it.
So they made a critical pivot to email payments, which was a common idea, but their technology was just better, easier to use. But then they faced this huge scaling problem. They needed millions of users, and fast, to get the network effects they needed.
And this is where the mania of that era became strategically useful for them. They employed a growth strategy that was, fiscally insane in traditional terms.
We literally paid people.
They literally paid people to sign up. You got $10 for joining and 10 more for every friend you referred. This resulted in staggering viral growth, sometimes 7 to 10% daily.
Wow.
They achieved critical mass, hundreds of thousands of users, but their cash burn was just astronomical.
The genius, though, was recognizing the clock was ticking. They knew that the boom was unsustainable.
Precisely. They raised $100 million in venture funding in March of 2000. That was just weeks before the NASDAQ peaked and the bubble violently burst.
The timing was everything.
Everything. That money, raised at the absolute peak of the market, it wasn't for expansion. It was simply financial runway. It earned them the time they needed to fix their product, to solve massive fraud problems, and to eventually achieve success. Had they missed that timing, the crash, which Thiel sees as a kind of divine judgment against technological optimism, it would have wiped them out.
But the fallout from that crash led entrepreneurs to embrace this extreme caution, which led to 4 big lessons, or dogmas, that the book argues are fundamentally wrong because they favor 1 to n thinking over 0 to 1.
It was a massive overreaction to the perceived excess of the 90s. The entire culture just shifted from hubris to humility.
So the first lesson became, make incremental advances. Grand visions like replacing the dollar were seen as risky, as arrogant. Founders were told, be humble, take small, safe steps.
But Thiel argues the opposite is true, he says. It is better to risk boldness than triviality. Trivial advances, they inevitably lead to cutthroat competition on what's called a local maximum, finding the best possible version of something that already exists.
You're just optimizing a small hill.
Exactly. But true value comes from aiming for a breakthrough, even if it feels incredibly risky.
The second dogma was stay lean and flexible. Planning was considered arrogant. Entrepreneurship was supposed to be this agnostic experimentation. Just throw things at the wall, see what sticks, and then iterate constantly.
The pivot became a virtue in itself. But the counter-principle is, a bad plan is better than no plan. Indefinite experimentation might help you pivot well within an existing industry, but it's only going to lead you to that local maximum again. If you're trying to build something truly new, 0 to 1, you need foresight, you need design, you need a definite plan, even if that plan is imperfect and needs refinement later.
A founder is a designer, not just a reaction machine.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, third, improve on the competition. Don't try to create a new market prematurely. Instead, iterate on existing proven products, like building a slightly better search engine than the one that's already out there.
And the counter principle, which we're going to get into a lot deeper in a minute, is that competitive markets destroy profits. If your main goal is to improve on a competitor, you are actively choosing to enter a fight that will inevitably drain all your resources until profits hit 0. It's just an irrational business strategy.
And the final dogma, which is beloved by engineers who, kind of distrust advertising, was focus on product, not sales. The whole field of dreams idea.
If you build it, they will come.
Right. If the product is good enough, it sells itself, and advertising is just wasteful.
And the necessary counter principle to that is, sales matters just as much as product. Technology is only half the equation. Distribution is the hidden half of success. The wastefulness of those bubble-era ad campaigns didn't negate the need for a robust strategy to get your product into people's hands.
So what we're really seeing here is the psychological fallout. The crash pushed the entire world to reject technology, the 0 to 1, and to embrace globalization, the 1 to N, as the only hope for the future. The book argues we need to reclaim some of that 1999-style hubris, that boldness of ambition, but temper it with the clarity of knowing how to build genuinely valuable, defensible technology.
And that clarity leads us directly into the book's next major, and I'd say most provocative argument, the monopoly imperative.
This is where we shift that contrarian question to a business context. The question becomes, what valuable company is nobody building?
And this section forces a really difficult distinction.
Sure.
A lot of entrepreneurs think they are doing something valuable. But the book argues that creating value is necessary, but it is not sufficient. You also have to capture some of that value.
And this is why very big businesses can still be very bad businesses.
Exactly. The book uses this incredibly stark analogy of the U.S. airline industry. Airlines create immense value for society, right? They fly millions of passengers, enable hundreds of billions of dollars in commerce.
Sure, they're essential.
And yet in 2012, when the average one-way airfare was around $178, the airlines collectively only made 37 cents in profit per passenger trip. The industry is just characterized by this relentless cutthroat competition.
37 cents, that's unbelievable. Now compare that to Google.
So Google creates less total value than the entire airline industry. They had about $50 billion in revenue in 2012, compared to $160 billion for all the airlines. But because Google is not in a competitive market for search, they capture far more of that value. They boast a 21% profit margin. The result is that Google is worth 3 times more than every single U.S. airline combined. The lesson is simple, but so powerful. Creating immense value is meaningless if you operate in a perfectly competitive market where that value is immediately driven down to 0 profit by your rivals.
But hang on, this whole concept is highly controversial. I mean, we are taught in Economics 101 that perfect competition is the ideal state. It maximizes consumer benefit. Doesn't advocating for monopoly immediately invite antitrust scrutiny and political opposition?
It does, and that's the challenge. The book argues that the economic ideal of perfect competition is, in reality, a blueprint for long-term failure for the business itself. In perfect competition, firms are completely undifferentiated, they're selling identical products, and they're forced to sell at the lowest possible market price.
So any potential profit is instantly competed away.
Instantly. The end result of this equilibrium is just stasis and ultimately death for the company. So the book's radical claim is that capitalism and competition are opposites.
So the goal then must be a creative monopoly. A company that is so good at what it does that no other firm can offer a close substitute, like Google and Search or Apple in its closed ecosystem.
Exactly. Monopolies are the foundational condition for every successful business because they allow for long-term planning. If you aren't fighting for survival against identical rivals every single day, you can actually reinvest your profits in innovation, you can pay your employees well, and you can plan to execute a 5-year 0-to-1 vision rather than just focusing on next quarter's marginal gains.
And crucially, the book states that these creative monopolies are actually good for society, which addresses that whole rent-seeking critique.
Right. They're powerful engines for societal improvement. They're not static rent collectors like the properties in the board game monopoly. They create entirely new categories of abundance. Apple's monopoly profits from the iPhone. They weren't artificially extracted through scarcity. They were the reward for creating unprecedented abundance, the first truly usable smartphone that fundamentally improved the lives of billions of people.
Now, if a company actually achieves this kind of dominance, the last thing they want is for the government or the public to recognize it as a monopoly.
Of course not.
Which leads to what the book calls the delightful art of disguise.
Monopolists are absolute masters of defining their market broadly to hide their dominance. Google, which has a massive share of the search advertising market, is forced to define itself as a tiny, humble player in the enormous $495 billion global advertising market, where its share is only around 3.4%.
They define their market as the union of large sectors.
Exactly. It's search engine plus mobile phones plus wearable computers. This strategic blurring makes them look small and multifaceted, not like a monopoly.
And non-monopolists, the competitive startups, they tell the opposite lie.
They define their market extremely narrowly to claim total dominance by definition. The humorous example is the British restaurant in Palo Alto. If you define your market as British food in Palo Alto, well, you have a monopoly.
But the actual market is the hyper-competitive Palo Alto restaurant industry, which makes it a terrible business.
Precisely. These competitive startups, they exaggerate their distinction by defining their market as the intersection of tiny niche markets, trying to create a category of one that is ultimately meaningless.
And this comparison is so crucial. PayPal, the sole email payments company at the time, employed fewer people than all the hyper-competitive restaurants on Castro Street combined, yet their business was exponentially more valuable because they had a real monopoly in a specific scalable niche.
And this reveals the underlying destructive nature of competition itself. It's not just an economic force, it's an ideology. It pervades society, and it psychologically distorts our thinking, often leading people toward ruthless rivalry rather than creation.
You see this pathology in academia, right, where the system forces highly talented students into these fierce rivalries for a limited number of conventional careers like banking or consulting. It turns potential 0-to-1 creators into conformists obsessed with winning defined battles.
The author's personal anecdote about failing to get a Supreme Court clerkship is incredibly illustrative of this. He was devastated at the time, but he later realized that winning that ultimate conventional competition might have actually derailed his life. He would have been set for life, sure, but he'd likely be stuck drafting other people's deals, trading creation for conventional success.
The narrative of rivalry, it often centers not on dissimilar groups, but on groups that are strikingly alike. They get so focused on defeating the rival that they forget their original goal. It's pure Shakespeare.
It is. Two households, both alike in dignity. Think of Microsoft and Google. They started in different quarters of technology, but they became so obsessed with each other that they engaged in these resource-draining symmetrical rivalries. Windows versus Chrome OS, Bing versus Search, Office versus Docs.
They just mirrored each other.
Their intense reciprocal focus on each other allowed Apple to quietly come along and overtake them both by executing a unique, definite, 0-to-1 vision that neither of them saw coming.
We even saw this petty, destructive war over, of all things, mobile payment devices.
The book jokes about it. You had Square, which was a square, NetSecure with a half moon, Intuit with a cylinder, and PayPal with a triangle. They were all fighting over card reader shapes. The goal became winning the tactical war over shape or pricing or ads like Pick, Pets.com obsessing over their rivals, Petstore.com and Petopia.com, rather than solving the core business viability question.
Pets.com lost $300 million because the war just wasn't worth fighting. They were competing in a space where they had no proprietary technology, no real edge.
And the most catastrophic examples show how rivalry can become deeply personal, like the Oracle versus Informix database wars.
I remember reading about this.
Larry Ellison of Oracle and the Informix CEO, Phil White, they were consumed by personal hatred. White spent so much time on petty public attacks against Ellison, he even commissioned hostile billboards, that he took his eye completely off his own business. This personal rivalry culminated in a massive accounting scandal at Informix and prison time for White for securities fraud.
Wow.
The intense focus on the rival led to the complete destruction of the combatant.
So the ultimate lesson, then, is to avoid the fight entirely by creating a monopoly. But if you must fight,
Strike hard and end it quickly. That's the key takeaway from the PayPalX.com merger. They were in an all-out war in Silicon Valley, but the founders realized the impending bubble crash would ruin them both before a victor could emerge. Merging allowed them to survive as a unified team and secure that financial runway, transforming a destructive rivalry into a single successful company.
okay, so once you've avoided competition by creating a monopoly in a niche market, the next critical step is ensuring your business is actually durable. We're often told that being the first mover is key, but the book argues that the goal isn't speed. It's what truly matters is generating significant cash flows far into the future.
That's right, because the total value of any business today is calculated by the sum of all the money it will make in the future, discounted back to its present worth. And this trajectory fundamentally separates great technology companies from low-growth businesses.
Can you explain that difference in trajectory a little more?
Sure. Low-growth businesses, like, say, a newspaper or a restaurant or a trendy nightclub, they see most of their value realized in the immediate term. Their expected cash flow declines pretty rapidly as trends change or substitutes emerge.
They have a short shelf life.
Right. But technology companies, they often lose money in the first few years as they scale. Their trajectory is the complete reverse. PayPal, back in 2001, projected that 75% of its entire value would come from profits generated 10 or more years down the line, from 2011 and beyond. That massive risk and potential payoff is what drives valuation.
So the focus shouldn't be on being the first to market, but on being the last mover.
Correct. The goal is to make the last great development in a specific market and then enjoy decades of monopoly profits. Being the first just means you invite competition and you have to deal with all the engineering and distribution risks yourself. Being the last means you built the definitive version. This is why durability, the ability to endure competition for decades, is the most important qualitative characteristic, even if it's the hardest to measure.
So to assess that durability, we need to analyze what the book calls the 4 characteristics of monopoly. These are the qualitative elements that make a business defensible over time.
First up is proprietary technology. To overcome customer inertia and the appeal of existing solutions, your technology has to be at least 10 times better than the closest substitute.
10 times? That's a high bar.
It is. Anything less than 10x is just an incremental improvement, and it invites failed competition.
So what does that 10x improvement look like in practice? It sounds almost unattainable for most startups.
Well, it can be achieved through a pure invention or through radical efficiency. PayPal achieved it by being 10 times better than mailing a check for eBay transactions. You got instant guaranteed funds versus waiting 7 to 10 days and dealing with potential fraud.
That's a clear 10x improvement.
It is. Amazon achieved it by offering 10 times more books than any physical retail store, which fundamentally changed consumer expectations. And Apple's iPad didn't invent the tablet, but its integrated design made the technology 10x more useful than the clunky, unusable tablets that came before it.
Okay, so the second characteristic is network effects. This is the core mechanism of defensibility. A product becomes inherently more valuable as more people use it. It creates a natural moat around the business.
And the paradoxical genius here is that a network effects business must start with an especially small market. If you try to target the entire world from day one, like the failed Xanadu project in the 1960s, you fail because you need everyone to join at the same time.
So you start small and dense.
Exactly. Facebook started only with Harvard students. By dominating that small, dense initial network, they made the service indispensable to that tiny group, which then allowed them to successfully scale outward to adjacent universities and eventually the world.
Third is economies of scale. A monopoly gets stronger, more efficient, and more profitable as it gets bigger.
And software startups particularly benefit here because the fixed cost engineering, R&D, infrastructure can be spread across millions or billions of users, which pushes the marginal cost of production down to near zero.
Compare that to a service business.
Right. Contrast this with a service business, like a chain of yoga studios or dry cleaners. While they can extend, they gain very limited advantage with scale because the core cost of the service labor, rent, remains high. A truly great startup has to have the potential for dramatic scale and near-zero marginal cost baked into its initial design.
And finally, we have branding, which is a powerful psychological and aesthetic way to claim a unique market position. Apple is the prime modern example here.
Branding is important, yes, but the book warns that it has to be built on the underlying substance: proprietary technology, network effects, and scale. Trying to build a technology company on brand alone is dangerous and just unsustainable.
You're just building a house of cards.
You are. You look at Yahoo's attempts in the post-2012 era to become cool again by overhauling its logo and making trendy acquisitions. Without fundamental 0-to-1 product creation, that branding effort was just window dressing for a business internal decline.
So once these four characteristics are identified, the strategy for deploying them is key, and that's the scaling strategy.
And the primary strategy is non-negotiable. Start small and monopolize. Always err on the side of starting too small. When an entrepreneur talks about getting just 1% of a $100 billion market, that's a massive red flag.
Boy, is that a red flag.
Because that 1% is incredibly hard to get due to cutthroat competition, and even if you do get it, the profit will be zero. It shows a lack of focus.
Right, that's the lesson PayPal learned, pivoting from millions of scattered Palm Pilot users to the few thousand high-volume eBay power sellers who desperately needed an instant solution.
Absolutely. Once you dominate that niche, then you gradually expand to adjacent, slightly broader markets. Amazon is the textbook case for this. They started very deliberately with rare books, a small market underserved by physical bookstores. Then they scaled sequentially to CDs, videos, and eventually every physical product imaginable, slowly becoming the world's general store.
And the final strategic piece of advice here is to avoid the competitive mindset of disruption.
The act of creation, that 0-to-1, is more important than opposing old industries. The term disruption implies you're picking a fight. And disruptive companies like Napster, they often pick fights they cannot win and attract unnecessary legal and regulatory attention.
So you want to create a new category, not attack an old one.
Exactly. PayPal succeeded because rather than fighting Visa or MasterCard, they expanded the entire market for online payments. They provided so much net new business to Visa that they became a partner rather than a rival.
Okay, so moving from business structure and strategy to more of a philosophy, the book tackles this enduring debate about success. Is it due to luck or is it skill? We constantly hear hugely successful people, from Jeff Bezos to Warren Buffett, attributing their fortunes to luck or timing or being part of the Lucky Sperm Club.
Yet the existence of these serial multi-billion-dollar entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and Jack Dorsey, it strongly counters that narrative. It's hard to argue that the ability to found 3 or 4 successful, category-defining companies is purely accidental. As Jack Dorsey tweeted, success is never accidental.
Since we can't rewind history and test business decisions like a scientific experiment, the debate really boils down to one fundamental choice for the founder. Do you treat the future as definite, as something you can plan and design, or as indefinitely uncertain, subject only to chance?
This is where the 4 attitudes toward the future provide a powerful framework for self-analysis. It's based on 2 axes: optimistic versus pessimistic, and definite versus indefinite.
So let's start with the ideal state that the book advocates for, which is definite optimism.
This is the mindset that really flourished in the U.S. from the 17th century through the 1950s and 60s. It's the conviction that the future will be better if we plan and work hard to make it so. It believes in the agency of human will and design. This is the mindset that delivered the Manhattan Project, the Apollo program, and the interstate highway system. People took specific, decade-long bets on specific technological outcomes.
And then you have where the U.S. has broadly settled since the early 1980s, indefinite optimism.
And this is the belief that the future will be better, but we don't need specific plans to achieve it. It's a passive optimism that just assumes progress will happen automatically, often thanks to evolution or Darwinism.
Process over substance.
Exactly. Process trumps substance. This creates the phenomenon of omnicompetence. And elite education students keep all their options open, curating these bewilderingly diverse resumes so they're ready for anything, which really means they commit to nothing specific.
And the book argues this is epitomized by the world of finance.
It is. Bankers, lawyers, consultants, they spend their careers rearranging existing structures and capital, not creating new wealth. Money becomes the sole goal. not a means to a specific technological end. In this indefinite political environment, the focus shifts from coordinating complex, difficult solutions like building a lunar module to simply providing insurance and entitlements. You just send out checks instead of pursuing definite technological breakthroughs.
Then there is definite pessimism, which is often applied to present-day China.
They believe the future is knowable and difficult, and that it must be endured by relentlessly copying successful past models. That's globalization, the one to end. They focus on hard work, discipline, and iteration on existing technologies, rather than new invention, because they have a specific, measurable plan for catching up.
And finally, indefinite pessimism, which the book uses to describe modern Europe.
Here, they expect a bleak, unknowable future, which leads to bureaucratic stagnation, low risk-taking, and a focus on just waiting for decline. This is why you see the cultural fixation on vacation mania. If the decline is inevitable, you might as well take the maximum time off to enjoy the present moment.
The fundamental problem, according to Thiel, is that this indefinite optimism is just unsustainable. I mean, how can the future possibly get better if no one is actually planning for it?
And this is the critical critique of the lean startup methodology when you apply it to 0 to 1 breakthroughs. Iteration making small, rapid changes is excellent for finding a local maximum. You can find the best possible feature set for a dating app that way, but it won't take you from 0 to 1.
It can't make the big leap.
It can't. If you are starting from 0, you have to have a definite multi-year plan, because random chance is not going to produce a breakthrough like the iPhone.
The return of design, therefore, rests with the great entrepreneurs. Steve Jobs' greatest design was not just the phone, it was his business imagining and executing that definite multi-year sequence of iPod, then iPhone, then iPad.
A business with a good, definite plan will always be underrated in a world that sees the future as fundamentally random. A startup is the largest endeavor over which a founder can exercise definite mastery, and rejecting the tyranny of chance is the very first step in building something truly new.
If the indefinite world rejects planning, then the definite world has to embrace the reality that value is highly, highly unevenly distributed.
Which brings us to the power law.
We often hear about the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, that 80% of the value comes from 20% of the input. But the book argues the power law is far more extreme than that. What's the fundamental difference?
The Pareto principle suggests that things are just slightly unevenly distributed. The power law describes a world where a small few radically outstrip all rivals. It's not 80-20, it's more like 99-1, or sometimes even 100-0. You see this everywhere in nature and society. The biggest cities are massively bigger than the next tier. The biggest earthquakes dwarf all others, and the biggest monopoly businesses dwarf every competitive business combined.
And this singular skew is most evident in venture capital, where returns do not follow a nice, bell-shaped normal distribution.
This is what the book calls the biggest secret in venture capital. VC returns strictly follow a power law. The best investment in a successful fund equals or outperforms the entire rest of the fund combined. For example, for Founders Fund's 2005 portfolio, Facebook alone returned more than all the other investments combined. And Palantir, the second best, was expected to return more than the sum of every other investment aside from Facebook.
Wow. So that has two radical implications for how a VC firm must operate.
Rule number 1. VCs must only invest in companies that have the potential to return the value of the entire fund. That means eliminating 95% of businesses right off the bat, including many that look perfectly sound and moderately successful.
Okay, and rule number 2.
Because rule number 1 is so restrictive, there can't be any other rules. You have to be open to the unusual founder with the contrarian idea that could actually achieve that scale.
So VCs who focus on diversification, spreading their bets across many safe-looking companies, are just fundamentally misunderstanding the mathematics of value creation.
They're just buying lottery tickets.
And this same brutal law applies directly to you, the individual learner, and your career decisions. You can't diversify your life by keeping dozens of equally possible careers open, just hoping one will succeed.
But the institutionalized education system, with its alphabetical course catalogs, its 45-minute classes, and its emphasis on well-roundedness, it falsely suggests that it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you do it well.
But the truth, derived from the power law, is that it absolutely does matter what you do.
It matters immensely. You have to think hard about whether your singular focus will be valuable in the definite future. The differences in value between the best companies will dwarf the differences in roles inside companies. This is why people who understand the power law often choose to join the very best company while it's growing fast, rather than starting their own small, struggling venture.
Right, because owning 0.01% of Google is worth far more than 100% of a venture that only achieves a moderate success.
Precisely. The most important things, the market you choose, the product you build, the distribution strategy, they must be singular and hyper-focused.
To achieve that singular, valuable focus and create a 0 to 1 business, you have to find something that others have missed. And this involves the search for secrets.
Every correct answer to that contrarian question, what important truth do very few people agree with you on, is necessarily a secret. And secrets are defined as something important and unknown, hard to do but absolutely doable. We can distinguish them from conventions, which are easy and already known, and mysteries, which are impossible, like string theory.
The cultural danger right now is believing the Unabomber's diagnosis, that all the hard problems have been solved and only easy incremental tasks or impossible mysteries remain.
That belief is incredibly corrosive. It's reflected in academic incrementalism, in risk aversion, and in a cultural cynicism that says, if it were possible to discover something new, wouldn't someone smarter in the global talent pool have found it already? This voice of doubt dissuades people from even looking.
But the book argues forcefully that secrets still exist.
They exist, waiting for relentless searchers, cures for age, new energy sources, new frontiers in space.
And often, the greatest business opportunities come from unsuspected secrets. Secrets hidden not in deep science, but in plain sight, just masked by convention.
Think of Airbnb. The secret wasn't a technological breakthrough. It was recognizing untapped supply, all those unoccupied rooms, and unaddressed demand, travelers needing cheap, authentic lodging. Others overlooked it because they were focused only on the conventional hotel market.
Or Uber and Lyft.
Same idea. They just solved the logistical secret of connecting drivers and riders efficiently using a mobile interface. These massive businesses were built on insights that look elementary in retrospect, but they were secrets hidden by cultural inertia.
The book breaks down the search for these secrets into 2 distinct categories that founders should be hunting for.
The first is secrets of nature. These are the undiscovered aspects of the physical world. Think new physics, new chemistry. And these are often overappreciated by scientists. The second is secrets about people. These are the things people don't know about themselves or things they hide due to social convention. These are usually underappreciated.
So how do you find those?
You find them by asking, what are people not allowed to talk about or admit to?
We can revisit the monopoly secret here. You can find the truth that competition and capitalism are opposites empirically by looking at corporate profits.
Or by asking what people running competitive companies are afraid to admit that they are losing money and they secretly hate their rivals.
And that leads to this powerful metaphor. The best companies are built around a secret that's hidden from the outside. A great company is essentially a conspiracy to change the world.
And when you share that secret with the people you hire, you make them fellow conspirators, tightly bound by a shared, unique vision.
But the best secret in the world can't save a company that has a flawed start. This is codified in Thiel's law. A startup messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed.
The beginning is qualitatively different. Bad decisions made early on, a partner choice that turns into conflict, or the wrong early hires, are almost impossible to correct without a crisis on the order of bankruptcy or a complete restructuring.
So choosing a co-founder is like a marriage.
It is. And the founders should share a prehistory, a deep understanding of each other's work ethic and weaknesses before starting a company together, rather than just meeting at a networking event and rolling the dice.
To ensure that foundation is strong, you need clear alignment across 3 distinct concepts: ownership, possession, and control.
Ownership is who legally owns the equity. The founders, employees, investors. Possession is who runs the company day to day, the managers and employees. And control is who formally governs the company, the board of directors. Misalignment here is a conflict multiplier. For instance, if a founder owns 50%, but the board, which is control, is stacked with VCs, that can lead to constant strategic warfare.
So a key practical takeaway here for founders is the structure of that board.
Keep the board small for effective oversight and rapid decision-making. 3 is ideal for a private company, and the book warns to never have more than 5. A huge board provides no effective oversight. It's merely camouflage for a microdictator who wants to appear democratic while consolidating power.
And internal alignment also relies on 100% commitment. The book is notoriously strict about consultants, part-timers, and especially high cash compensation.
Everyone involved must be full-time. There is no middle ground. And a low CEO salary is a clear pattern in successful, mission-driven startups. The book suggests a salary under $150,000 a year.
Why so low?
Because a high cash salary incentivizes the CEO to defend the status quo and their personal comfort, like a politician defending his current position. Low cash focuses the CEO on the long-term goal, increasing company value, which aligns their personal interests with the equity holders.
This preference for equity over cash is critical because it reveals a preference for the long term.
Right. If an employee or an executive prefers equity, they're revealing a genuine commitment to increasing the company's future value, even if that means short-term financial sacrifice. However, since perfect fairness in equity allocation is impossible, later hires might be more crucial than early hires who took massive risk. The book gives the practical advice that founders should keep the specific equity details secret to avoid resentment and internal competition among the team.
That focus on team and alignment leads directly to the question of culture. Thiel famously describes the goal as building a company that is tightly knit instead of transactional, referring to the founding team of his first major success.
The famous PayPal Mafia.
The mafia became a phenomenon because the strength of that culture transcended the company. It yielded serial success. The founders of SpaceX, Tesla, LinkedIn, YouTube, Yelp, and Palantir all came from that team.
And the key was that the team was not assembled transactionally. They didn't just hire the most talented people available, they hired people who were excited to work specifically with them because they shared a unique worldview. In their case, it was an obsession with science fiction, libertarianism, and digital currency.
So when you're recruiting these conspirators, the critical question for the founder is highly specific. Why should the 20th employee join your company when she could go to Google or Facebook for more money and more prestige?
And bad answers are just generalities. We have smart people, challenging problems, and valuable stock. Every competitive company claims that. The good answers have to be radically specific. They must center on the unique mission, creating a digital currency or colonizing Mars, and why the specific team at your company is the unique personal match for that employee.
They need to join a tribe.
A tribe of like-minded people, fiercely devoted to the mission, not just clocking in at a job.
And once that core team is assembled, the management structure has to actively minimize internal conflict, which the book calls a company's autoimmune disease.
Internal competition is the enemy of 0-1 creation. The best management strategy, according to the book, is making every single person responsible for just one thing. That person's success is measured only on that single thing, with no overlap with anyone else. This reduces the risk of internal turf wars and forces everyone to focus their energy outward on the mission instead of inward on office politics.
And this singular focus and this intense culture places successful startups on the extreme end of the spectrum, close to being a cult.
The book says successful startups are slightly less extreme kinds of cults. The key difference is that cults are fanatically wrong about something important that outsiders can easily spot, while successful startups are fanatically right about a secret that outsiders have missed. The lesson is, you shouldn't worry if your company culture seems unusual or doesn't make sense to conventional, indifferent professionals.
This intensity helps explain the founder's paradox. Founders are often figures of extreme, almost inverse normal distribution. They are highly unusual people who develop extreme traits.
They are simultaneously insiders, deeply embedded in their technology, and outsiders, often rejected by conventional society. They can be famous, yet infamous, often cash poor but paper rich. They are different, they develop those extreme traits, they exaggerate them, and then the media and public exaggerate them further, creating a myth like Richard Branson or Sean Parker.
Historically, figures with extreme traits, the unique heroes or kings like Oedipus or Romulus, often served as scapegoats, blamed for misfortune or conflict, which led to the roots of monarchy.
And we see this modern technological version with figures like Howard Hughes and Bill Gates. Gates, the awkward outsider who built a 90% market share monopoly, was ultimately made the scapegoat during the antitrust lawsuit era. His company entered a decade of stagnation while he was forced to step down as CEO, deprived of the founder's full authoritative engagement.
But the return of Steve Jobs to Apple showed the irreplaceable value of a founder to a company's trajectory.
A unique founder can make those authoritative, difficult decisions, inspire loyalty based on personality, and crucially, plan for decades, in contrast to short-time horizon bureaucracies staffed by interchangeable professional managers. However, the final caution is that founders must avoid believing their own myth. They are not Randian prime movers. A great founder's true value lies in their ability to bring out the best, most focused work from everyone at the company.
We've talked extensively about product, team, and secrets, but the book reserves a special, long chapter for the most underrated aspect of business: distribution. In Silicon Valley, there is this persistent field of dreams fallacy that the product sells itself. The book argues this is fundamentally delusional.
Distribution, everything it takes to sell and deliver a product, is widely underestimated, especially by engineers and technologists. They value transparency in product work, and they instinctively mistrust sales, viewing it as superficial or even deceitful, because sales requires persuasion rather than pure sincerity.
And because sales can be manipulative, we actively dislike being reminded when we're being sold. That's why everyone involved in distribution often has a hidden job title. Account executives, business development, investment bankers, politicians, they're all selling something under the guise of service.
The truth is, sales ability distinguishes the superstars in every field. The rainmaking lawyers, the self-promoting academics, the master deal makers. It takes hard work to make sales look effortless, like Tom Sawyer persuading his friends to pay him to whitewash the fence.
So what's the blunt conclusion?
The book's blunt conclusion is this. The engineer's grail is a product that sells itself. But if you haven't invented an effective way to sell your new product, you have a bad business, no matter how good the core technology is.
So to determine the right strategy, you have to carefully match the customer lifetime value, CLV, to the customer acquisition cost, CC. This determines where your business falls on the distribution continuum.
At the high end, you have complex sales, where the CAC is often $10 million or more. These are 7- or 8-figure deals, requiring close personal attention from the highest levels, often taking months or even years. The CEO has to be the salesperson.
An example of this is Palantir, whose CEO, Alex Karp, famously spends 25 days a month on the road closing these complex sales with government agencies and financial institutions. SpaceX is another prime example, convincing NASA to sign multi-billion-dollar launch contracts.
And because the deals are so high value and require such specialized attention, growth in this sector is methodical and predictable, typically 50% to 100% year over year. You don't scale through mass advertising. You scale by expanding the number of people capable of closing those highly specialized deals.
Okay, next is personal sales, where the CAC is more like $10,000 to $100,000. These are deals sized for scalable sales teams, but they still require a high-touch process.
Box is a great case study here. They started by securing small departmental accounts, like selling cloud storage to the Stanford Sleep Clinic, before scaling up that model to the entire enterprise. ZocDoc is another example. They hire sales teams to grow the network by adding doctors, which increases value for consumers, which in turn increases its appeal to more doctors. Here, the distribution strategy is intertwined with the network effect functionality.
And then in the middle, we hit the distribution doldrums.
This is the dead zone. Products priced around $1,000 to $10,000. Advertising is too broad to be cost-effective for a niche product, and personal sales are too expensive, exceeding the CLV. Think of specialized software for convenience store inventory management. Distribution, often neglected in the initial business plan, becomes the hidden bottleneck that kills small and medium-sized businesses in this price range.
At the lower end, we have marketing and advertising, with a CAC of around $100. This is used for low-priced, mass-appeal products that lack viral distribution.
Warby Parker, selling $100 eyeglasses, uses quirky TV commercials as their great big megaphone to reach a mass audience. But startups have to be incredibly clever to avoid competing head-to-head with big companies' massive ad budgets. PayPal learned this when its expensive conventional Super Bowl ad campaign, featuring a cartoon alien named Scotty, flopped compared to Priceline's successful but equally expensive William Shatner campaign.
And finally, the holy grail. Viral marketing, where the CAC is close to $1.
This is when the product's core functionality requires or strongly encourages users to invite their friends, leading to exponential, often explosive growth. PayPal achieved that staggering 7% daily growth by paying users to sign up and refer. While the cost was $20 per customer, the rapid viral spread created the critical mass needed to dominate the eBay power seller niche and become the last mover. This is the only way to scale truly fast and cheaply at the lower end of the pricing spectrum.
Speaking of scaling technology, we have to address this pervasive fear that software is eating the world and that computers will replace human labor. The book addresses this by focusing on complementarity, man and machine.
The premise that computers will replace humans is fundamentally wrong, and it misses where true value is created. Globalization means substitution because humans in different countries compete for the same manufacturing or service jobs. Technology, however, means complementarity because humans and computers excel at fundamentally different things. They are tools, not rivals.
Right. Humans possess intentionality and common sense, allowing for complex, basic judgments, but we struggle with massive data sets. Computers excel at processing data but fail spectacularly at basic judgment.
Like Google's supercomputer needing 10 million thumbnails to finally identify a cat, a task a 4-year-old performs flawlessly on the first try.
So the most valuable businesses empower people through this complementarity.
Exactly. Think of PayPal's fraud detection system, known internally as Igor. Automation failed repeatedly against adaptive criminals. Success only came from a hybrid system. Computers flagged suspicious transactions, but highly trained human analysts made the final, crucial judgment, recognizing evolving patterns and criminal intent that the computer missed.
And that successful model is the foundation of Palantir.
Palantir uses that exact Igor model to help human analysts, prosecutors, and intelligence officers extract insight from divergent data sources, whether that's locating bin Laden, predicting IED placement, or prosecuting insider trading. The software provides the data processing and flagging, allowing the human to perform the intentional, complex judgment needed to solve the problem. Feels like medicine, law, and education are not going to be replaced by technology, but rather dramatically enhanced by this human-machine complementarity.
So to synthesize all these principles, the need for zero-to-one creation, the monopoly imperative, durability, and distribution, the book provides a powerful contrast. The massive clean tech failure of the 2000s versus Tesla's triumph.
Clean tech was seen as the inevitable next big thing due to massive social need and a trillion-dollar market size.
But that macro insight just wasn't enough. The failure resulted from ignoring the microscale questions, the 7 questions every great business must answer. So let's run clean tech through those questions, starting with technology. Was it 10x better?
Mostly, no. Most clean tech was incremental. Evergreen solar failed because even with modest efficiency gains, their costs were still higher than heavily subsidized Chinese competitors. A 20% lab improvement is meaningless in the real world when the fixed costs and risks of deploying new technology are so high. They fail to achieve the 10x breakthrough needed to overcome competition.
Okay, the monopoly question. Did they start with a small, dominant market?
They did the exact opposite. They chased the trillion-dollar global energy market, which guaranteed immediate, ruthless competition. They exaggerated their uniqueness. A solar company might claim 10% of the small U.S. solar market, but that's a microscopic fraction of the global energy market. They defined their market too broadly and found themselves immediately fighting on a global scale.
And the distribution question was a catastrophic failure, despite the clear demand for green energy.
Clean tech executives were focused almost exclusively on securing government subsidies and appealing to investors' people in suits. They were bad at selling to actual customers. The book points out that real technologists wear t-shirts and jeans. If the CEO looks like a salesman, he's probably a bad technologist and worse at sales. The focus was on subsidy hunting, not creating a product customers wanted to buy.
And finally, the durability question. What would stop China from wiping out the business?
Few had a defensible answer. Companies like Evergreen and Abound Solar were built on the convention that green energy was inevitable, not on a proprietary secret. They were immediately wiped out by predictable, subsidized competition because their businesses lacked the fundamental defensibility, the 10x technology, the network effects, the scale to endure decades of competition.
Now, compare this to Tesla, which answered all 7 questions correctly, leading to its triumph.
Starting with technology, Tesla didn't just iterate. They achieved superior integrated design, especially in battery and powertrain technology. The Model S was rated higher than any car ever reviewed, and crucially, other automakers now rely on Tesla's technology for their own electric fleets. That's a massive 10x lead.
Timing. Musk correctly identified a narrow window in 2010 to secure a massive, one-time $465 million government loan before subsidies became politically toxic following the Solyndra collapse. He used government support strategically, securing the cash flow runway, but he didn't rely on it for the business model's success.
Monopoly. They started tiny. They did not chase the trillion-dollar auto market. They dominated the small niche of high-end electric sports cars, the 109K Roadster achieving monopoly profits there, and then scaled deliberately to the luxury electric sedan market with the Model S. They went from niche dominance to adjacent market conquest.
Team. Musk is the consummate engineer and salesman, assembling a highly motivated, special forces caliber team, a true mafia focused on a singular mission.
Distribution. Tesla took distribution seriously by owning the entire chain, the Tesla stores, which gave them complete control over the customer experience and saved them long-term costs associated with conventional independent dealerships. They solved the distribution problem themselves.
Durability. They had a crucial head start. They moved faster than any established automaker, and they built a highly coveted brand that engendered consumer trust in a major, complex purchase. And crucially, the founder, Musk, remains in charge, ensuring a decades-long planning horizon.
And finally, the secret. Tesla built a brand around the hidden truth that clean tech was more of a social and fashion imperative than a pure environmental one. People were willing to pay a premium for a high-performance car that made them look cool, period, unlike the clunky, compromised vehicles that preceded it. That secret allowed them to differentiate themselves entirely from the competitive pack.
That brings us to the end of this deep dive into 0 to 1. And the core message is really clear. The future won't happen automatically. We face a stark choice between stagnation, a plateau followed by inevitable conflict, or an accelerating takeoff driven by new creation.
We have to reject the indefinite thinking that has paralyzed the developed world since the 1980s. Indefinite optimization, iteration, and flexibility will not solve our hard problems, whether that's finding new energy sources or curing diseases of age. The creation has to begin at the micro scale. No sector is so important that merely participating will guarantee success. You have to seize the agency of the founder and offer a superior 0 to 1 solution for a specific problem.
This book is a radical call to action for you, the learner, to seize the unique opportunity to do new things in your working life. The Power Law tells us that everything important is singular. Universe, your company, your life. The essential first step is to force yourself to think for yourself and see the world anew, questioning the dominant conventions.
As the author concludes, drawing on J.R. Tolkien, life is often like a long journey on a road set by previous travelers, seemingly infinite. But there is hope in the unknown.
Still round the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate. And though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way and take the hidden paths that run towards the moon or to the sun.
The road doesn't have to be infinite. The hidden path is the secret you haven't yet found.
So we leave you with this provocative thought. What specific, hard, and unpopular truth, what specific secret are you avoiding because conventional wisdom tells you it's impossible or too risky, and how will you force yourself to look for it this week? Think 0 to 1. Think differently. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.